Well, hello there and welcome back to the Company Road podcast. This episode may be slightly unconventional as I'm talking to someone who was almost so successful within agencies and in building new teams and offerings and side hustles and labs and offshoots within one company or a couple of companies that he was pretty much the archetypal intrapreneur, but now he's broken out of ad land and he's gone on to launch a number of ventures. We're going to hear about those shortly. I'd love to introduce this week's guest, David Webster. He's a former ad maestro from global ad powerhouse and giant BBH and co-founder of the Carrot Collective. David has years and years of experience in marketing and advertising. He spent a lot of his time in his career at the forefront of some of the most innovative work in Asia for brands such as Nike, Netflix, Uber, Google, Samsung, and a few others. He's won over 140 creative effectiveness awards in his career and has helped lead his previous agency to win Ad Age International Agency of the Year in 2018. At his core, David is an original thinker, and that's why I'm excited to introduce him to you today. And I can't wait to share this episode with you. So enjoy it. Thank you. David, the man, the myth, the legend, I want to extend a huge warm welcome to you from here in Melbourne all the way to you over in Singapore. And it was so good to see you a couple of weeks back at the most recent AI Create event in real life. We were introduced a little while ago, and that was after I'd seen your incredible TED Talk, and you just set something up quite radical in the world of work and for the world of work, which we'll get into in a little while. And before I spill the beans on that, let's just hear a bit more about your journey and why you feel like you've ended up in the place that you've ended up. Maybe we think back to the young David, and let's hear a bit about how you found your path, if we can.
Sounds good. Well, first of all, I'm still a young David. At heart, more so than in age, but I'm absolutely still a young David. Jokes aside, look, it's great to be here. Super fun, super excited, and really great to see you last week. Let's see, where do we start? So, well, maybe the basics. I spent the last 20 plus years, so not so young after all, in the creative industry, advertising in particular. Big agency world, started in London, did about 10 years in London, and not all in advertising, I started there, and then moved to Singapore about 15 years ago in 2008, and sort of been in that world ever since. I very much spent the last decade, I would say, or so, being that sort of pain in the backside of my CEOs, constantly badgering and pushing innovation, new businesses, new ideas, new ways of doing things, new things that should be broken, and so on and so forth. Until ultimately that became too much. I think became too much for them and for me. In 2020, I decided to leave the big advertising world, the world of sort of the grown-ups. So completely serendipitous that it was just before COVID. So COVID hadn't started yet when I resigned from my old company, where I was running a team of about 120 people. I based out of Singapore. Yeah, I left to join the world of startups. So esports initially. That unfortunately didn't go very far, mostly as a result of COVID, kicking in about 2 weeks after my official first day in the startup meant that the round of funding was coming in, got indefinitely put on hold. I then decided initially to take a bit of a break and thought, you know what, let's spend a bit of time reflecting what next. That lasted about a week. That's where my mild ADHD comes out. I just couldn't stand still. And my wife did not want me not to be busy with something work-related because I was becoming annoying. And about a week literally in of not doing anything, we started this great experiment called the Carrot Collective. And it started on the back of a call that one of my current co-founders gave me one day, wanting to leave his job, and me suggesting that, pitching an idea to him and suggesting that if he liked it, that maybe we could do it together. And he called me 3 days later telling me he had resigned, which I wasn't expecting. And I'm like, okay then, well, I guess we're doing this. And a week later, we had incorporated Carrot Collective, and we spent the following 6-7 months figuring out what Carrot Collective actually was. And eventually growing up with that over the last 2.5, 3 years or so. So that's where I am today. So I guess to summarize that, really that move from sort of intrapreneur in the creative business to onto a creative entrepreneur very much, which I am today.
That's a very concise way of describing some of the things that you've done. I think like you, I was also starting out in advertising in probably around the same sort of time. We may even have crossed paths at some stage in the London days. And it felt like an exciting time to be starting things back then. Very story driven. The world of brand was obviously held very highly, in high regard across a number of businesses, and a number of clients were doing some amazing work back then. And it was fun, but at the same time, extremely extremely challenging, right? I don't know how you felt going into that world, but do you feel like that almost set you up for the pace of life and the pace of work that was soon to follow? Because I feel like once you've run at that speed, you can't work differently.
You know what? It's a really interesting one. I think, absolutely. I mean, I think working in advertising is a great gym for being a workaholic for the rest of your life. In some weird, slightly dystopian way. But on a serious note, I think what advertising for me certainly did, I think beyond the period it was, but generally the industry is. And I've spoken to a few people about this a lot actually since. I genuinely believe advertising trains you for something very few other industries train you. And I think sets you up perfectly for the world in many ways of entrepreneurship, right? It's one of those few industries, those few disciplines where whatever the role you play, whether you are a creative or a strategist or an account person, doesn't really matter. But what it does, it basically teaches you, if you want, the full value chain of the ideation and creation process. You start by analyzing a problem. Whether it's conscious or unconscious, you develop sort of this innate, intuitive, analytical skills. Let me understand the problem, a problem I haven't lived with for a very long time, because it's constantly coming from the outside. Let me understand the problem really quickly. Let me break it up in something which I can communicate to others. Let me communicate it to others. Let me develop something as a result of that potential solution. Let me sell that solution. Once that solution is sold, let me execute that solution, and then let me deploy that solution. So what you're doing, you're going from the analysis of the problem, really sort of upstream, all the way down to the deployment. In the same role, in the same sort of job, multiple times a day, across multiple different types of problems. And there's something quite unique about that and how that sort of, again, sets you up, almost trains your mind to think in a certain way, very elastic in many ways. And I think that's, certainly the aspect I enjoyed the most of my job, that I respect the most of the industry, having been able to take a step out and look at it from the outside in. But also why I believe it's such a huge fertile ground for great innovation, not necessarily within the advertising space, but from sort of that amazing pool of talent, developing innovations and solutions to what I call real problems.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point. I think, again, back to the time that we started, but actually a lot of industry was set up differently to that. So if you're a manufacturer, if you had a product, or if you were developing a service offering, all of those things take time. And usually if you're an employee or a team member within one of those companies, it would take a long time to, I guess, spread your wings and understand that end-to-end process, because you'd usually be in one particular part of that process if you went to work at a Unilever, a Procter & Gamble, or anywhere else. And so interesting now that we fast forward into digital age, products being shipped all the time, the speed at which you can shift from understanding a problem to deploying a solution in a matter of days, weeks, hours now, obviously through AI. In a way, that microcosm of an end-to-end process, as you've outlined in advertising, it was setting people up quite well in a funny sort of way.
Absolutely. And again, I think when you take that to its sort of natural extreme or natural conclusion, is that's kind of the skill sets you need when building businesses, when building companies, especially, we're both sort of entrepreneurs. And one minute you are writing a business strategy, next meeting you are briefing somebody on a project. And next thing you are working on the company's accounts. Next thing you know, you're speaking to the bank manager because of some trivial, weird issue that happened, as it always seems to do at the wrong time. So you're constantly moving, changing, and analyzing, jumping around. I think something we often sort of underestimate of what I call the broader creative industry. We underestimate how well it prepares you for the real world, the act of real value creation through entrepreneurship. It's an industry with huge talent, huge capability, and an enormous lack of confidence in its own abilities, which is paradoxical in some ways, given, the image of advertising and ad people being so egotistical and self-centered. There is really a big lack of confidence in one's own capabilities. I really believe that.
I mean, that might be something to do with the fact that 9 out of 10 or 99% of ideas get shot down before they ever see the light of day. I mean, it's ruthless, right? Again, when I was working in London, I went to a talk which was given by Michael Bulk. He was the CEO and chairman of BBDO at the time. And he was talking very much in terms of advertising having two realms. One was egos and one was silos. And I think part of the success, but also to the detriment of what was needing to happen in a lot of ways, was that it was departmentalized. There were pigeonholing conversations happening here, there, and everywhere around the fact that you're creative, your strategy, you're just going to talk to the client, manage them. And actually that friction, it did create a conversation, obviously, in making that process and in making the things real. But at the same time, it created, and always, everyone's always peering over the other side of the fence to see what other people were doing. There was always a healthy debate, and it created that kind of sense of momentum, really, through quite intellectual and very heated conversations. But how did you go about navigating some of those egos and silos?
I mean, the industry is what it is, and I think you have to embrace sometimes having your own ego. I was quite lucky in some ways. I spent the bulk of my career at one agency. I only ever worked in two agencies, despite having had a relatively long career. So my first 4.5 years at Burnett in London, moved to BBH London in January 2006, and left BBH Singapore after an internal transfer in January 2020. So I've been very lucky in a way, because I think whereas those internal forces exist everywhere, I think what BBH did, and what I think is still sort of what was very special about the place, is everyone was aligned on a very, very, very clear agenda, sort of North Star. And that wasn't a North Star, somewhere up here that no one quite understands. It was a very sort of practical North Star, meaning we are all working to the same agenda. And that agenda was, with BBH, creating the absolute best work in the world. So whether you were a junior strategist, a middle-level account person, or a senior creative, or an intern, you were almost indoctrinated to the fact that the agenda you're working to is one and the same. And that was built through, reinforced through culture. And so in some way, that kind of systemically eliminated the concept of silos. Right now, silos did exist, of course, in many cases. But when you use culture as a way to start moving those things aside, and even when they do exist, they're never the priority, they never trump the work, and you are able to bring it back to that work. It really helps. I was always an account person since the day I started. And I'd like to think I've done some pretty famous work. I had an excellent relationship with creative teams and with strategists and with everyone around me. And I think the only reason isn't because I believe I was particularly nice, accommodating, nor smart. But It's because I always loved the one thing we were all there to do, which was I loved the creative act of getting to great outputs. And by simply doing that, whether I was wrong or right or a pain in the backside or not, everyone was very clear that whatever I was doing, whatever I was saying, however annoying I was being, it was for something which I truly believed was going to fulfill what we were all working towards. And that, I think, is really important when you take a step back and you reflect that upon any kind of organization, any kind of organizational model, any kind of culture. If you are able to align your teams, your people, your organizations around a common goal, a lot of the seemingly insurmountable things that get in the way of organizations, that organizations are very good at putting in the roadway, disappear on their own, move aside on their own.
Yeah, BBH obviously done some amazing work over the time. I think I saw a post from Sir John Hegarty either today or yesterday saying that he'd been in the industry for 50 years. And that's incredible to go for that long, obviously, and to just be prolific in the work that has obviously been created as well. So what an amazing achievement. But even so, it feels like a lot of people within that industry had a shorter term view, maybe a shelf life. They wouldn't want to be in it forever and ever. And it feels like you were able to stick it out by sticking true to that common purpose and that end goal. But obviously, you must have seen there was a lot of change happening around you during that time, which obviously is like you're pivoting and you're adapting with each wave, really. How was that for you?
Look, I have a slightly I briefly mentioned ADHD earlier. I've never actually been diagnosed. I self-diagnosed because I think for me, it's more of this idea of constantly moving forward. Constantly, even when there isn't a need to move things forward, still try to move things forward. And this really comes from this sort of hypothesis I've always had, which I was lucky to fulfill through my various roles. The signs of the requirement to change or the requirement to evolve or the requirement to adapt never presents itself in an obvious way. No one ever comes to your door, your office, or sends an email and goes, "Hey guys, it's time to adapt." I wish it happened like that. It doesn't, right? It's a sort of very imperceptible shift, imperceptible change. And like all imperceptible change, they are the most dangerous ones because you never see it coming until it's usually too late. If you start feeling it, it's probably too late to do something about it, right? And so the way I always used to deal with it was this idea that, or this notion that keeping the momentum is as important as what you actually do. So for me, the momentum was, if I'm constantly pushing, if I'm constantly looking for what next, or how to do something better, or how to improve something, if we're doing things this way, why can't we do them that way? If we're doing this today, why can't we do that tomorrow? By doing that and turning that into, again, a behavior and in a habit, if you want to, I always managed to ride that wave without ever it affecting me, because I was unconsciously always a step ahead of it. It's a bizarre way. But the interesting, I mean, this is one of the things, I remember before leaving Singapore in 2020, obviously lots of sort of conversation with a lot of people. And one of the things that was being asked a lot was, especially after having spent so many years there, you would like to think you had a little bit of an impact on the business. A lot of people were asking me, what will you miss the most? Or what's the piece of advice you'd love to leave behind? And this was it. Never stop pushing. My old CEO in BBH used to talk about the idea of fires and fireworks. You don't want a business only with fires, but you also don't want a business only with fireworks. If you don't have either, you're equally screwed. And in the case of agencies, it's often you need those fireworks. Have someone who has got permission through whether they earned the permission or whether they were given the permission, someone with the permission to push the agenda every single day to be the one tapping their CEO's shoulder and going, hey, what about this? What about that? What about that? Because if you don't need that before you know it, it's too late.
I love the point around permission, just to pick up on that in the last sentence there. I think that permission is helpful. It's a guiding principle, obviously. It gives people safety and comfort in the direction in which they're heading. And it's often sought out. Some managers and leaders will say, seek forgiveness rather than permission. And they prefer to see that pushing that you've described happening elsewhere, so that they can almost test their team members out and see what they would do if they had the runway and they would just go. A lot of people would find that extremely bewildering. How would you describe that? There are obviously people that are that way wired to just push, and there are people that would much rather just be part of the community, helping support, but not being that person. So I don't know if it's a wolf and the sheep analogy or whatever you want to use, but how do you navigate that as a leader?
Yeah, for me, again, it's back to that sort of fires and fireworks analogy, right? Which is, again, you need balance. You can't have an organization full of people that are constantly trying to evolve things and break things and move things forward. I mean, it's a very exciting place to work for about 6 months. And they drive you absolutely crazy, For me, the biggest thing was, especially when I eventually started my own business, was to be very self-aware of the fact that I've been that kind of firework for years. And that's what I love doing. I just genuinely, and that's what I'm good at doing. I'm good at innovating, at moving things on, at rallying people around me, around things that seem to make no sense, but actually they do make sense in my head somewhere, and eventually explaining that. I'm not very good at managing the long tail. I just am not. I don't enjoy doing it. I find it incredibly tedious and boring. But there are people out there which are phenomenal at it. And if they weren't there, I certainly would not have had the career I had and wouldn't be here today. 100%. Yeah. It's a combination, just to give you an analogy, a brief story, I remember, again, my ex-CEO of 11 years in BBH Singapore, I credit with a big part of what I've learned and giving me the chance to do what I did. He always used to tell me I was sitting on one of his shoulders and our CFO was sitting on the other shoulder. I'd be the one just bitching up here constantly. And she was the one, as the CFOs do, conservative, reason. We need to control. We need to manage. And he said, the brilliant thing of having you two around me was I listened to you and I listened to her and I did exactly something somewhere in the middle. And it was brilliant because I needed that. If I only followed you, we would have gone bust 6 times over. Maybe with a bit of luck, but bust 6 times over. If I only followed what the CFO was saying, we would probably be doing quite well, but be quite a boring business perhaps. So solid, but we wouldn't be pushing. And we need both. And that's the reality. And that's something which sometimes when you're in the role, you don't quite recognize and realize when you're working for someone else. Suddenly shifting the other side and moving from intra to entrepreneur, where it's my money ultimately on the table, or I'm reminded with my co-founders, you realize that's really important. You learn that lesson on your skin over and over again until it starts hurting. And therefore you learn to recognize that what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? When is the right time? The thing is critical in whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're working for someone else, to recognize when is the right time to step away? When is the right time to step back? When have you run your own course? It's hard in a business driven by egos. Really, really, really hard. But it's somewhat weirdly satisfying when that happens, right? Oh my God, look how amazing things are going. And I can focus on the next thing. So you're really a team design, that sort of building the organization, building the project is so critical. And as an experienced designer, you'll know this. It's balances. It's about checks and balances, making sure things work together in sort of harmony, if you want. That's, ultimately, I think, what it comes down to.
Yeah, no, it's certainly true. And I love the analogy of balances. And I feel like I'm always trying to, fine tune and engineer the perfect formula for what would happen on a project. So as an experienced designer, you're thinking about how you can make deliberate choices to create the perfect conditions for success in one way or another, both through working, but also through bringing the right team skill set. Like you say, it's yin yang and everything in between. You've kind of got to just throw it all into the pot and then see what's going to jump out at the end. And yeah, I'm just curious. You self-identify as more in the firework camp than the fire camp, it feels like. Is that a fair assumption, or more fireworks?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you were someone maybe earlier in your career, you were in this position as well, but you were trying to almost figure out where your comfort zone, where your sweet spot was, and where your effectiveness in your career would take you, and where it's what the center of gravity is. What behaviors in other people would you be looking at in using the analogy and then taking it a little bit further? What would you be looking out for that would say, okay, I can see that that's happening over there. I can see this is happening over here. I can see them effectively bringing change about by introducing new ideas and innovating here. This is very focused on delivering, seeing things through. What are some of the behaviors and characteristics that you're seeing?
Yeah. Well, look, I don't know if these are so much behaviors and characteristics rather than how to sort of identify those behaviors and characteristics in the first place. I mean, ultimately for me, it comes down to, I'm not someone who I like frameworks, but I don't like necessarily rules. I like the study of tools, not rules. And I think it's the same when trying to stimulate people, especially early on in their career, in terms of providing them with the space people need to find themselves and to understand who they ultimately are. Ultimately, again, cognizant of the fact that we are running businesses. We're not running schools. We're not running playgrounds. We're not running charities. We're not running games, but there needs to be a balance, right? And again, like everything, when people come to work, certainly, and again, I can only speak from my experience within the creative industry, come to work in a creative business. They want the chance to be creative. Now, being creative doesn't mean that you are a great writer or a great art director. Being creative, I mean, my definition of creativity, at least, I mean, that's a good way to start this is, or for me, the most elegant definition of creativity, because it's certainly not mine, it is this ability to bring seemingly unconnected things and concepts together into something that makes sense or solves a problem or it does something. Right? If we define that as creativity, then I think the fair assumption is that anyone coming into a creative business is looking for that. And by definition, a creative business, therefore, needs to be able to offer that. And I think within that process, especially early on in one's career, whether it's graduate recruitment programs, whether it's early training programs, is giving people the chance to find their feet and identify who are they, what do they enjoy doing. I think there is often a myth that, well, of course, given a choice, everyone would want to be a firework. It's not true. It just isn't. It's the same thing, people say, well, of course, everyone is motivated primarily by money. Well, actually, it's not true. And it's been proved over and over again that cash is not the biggest motivator in driving people's behaviors. And belonging, culture, and all that becomes actually trumped by the end of the day. And I think, therefore, in a very similar manner is how to provide people with the right opportunities, how to give people the right permissions to make certain mistakes and to find themselves, how to, and then slowly, very much like when A/B testing a concept, finding where people actually sit, moving them around. And as the business scales and as people go up their careers, giving them the opportunity to perhaps move, perhaps shift. And this is what I love about, really, for me, this concept, maybe this is straying away a little bit, but the concept of the distributed or decentralized organization, because you basically take that behavior at scale, right? Suddenly you become this ecosystem, if you want, that starts pulling people together who are developing in different directions and organizing them around projects. And that's for me, again, the natural conclusion of that process done right, which is, again, maybe another topic, but why I believe the industry is going towards that.
The skin in the game argument is a very compelling one, both for experienced entrepreneurs like yourself, but also ones that are starting out. If you're into startup culture and you're in conversations with people in their early 20s about things that they're doing, it's all very exciting. The risk arguably is different. The situation, the circumstance is different. But at the same time, there's a desire, there's an appetite and an acceptance of that risk to be able to say, this is what I want to do and this is how we're going to do it. Quite pragmatic, very focused on the mission, as you were saying. But I'm wondering whether the entrepreneur training ground, in a way, is different from the intrapreneur training ground, and whether one sets the other up for success or vice versa. I'm just sort of playing around with that in my head, because from what you were saying, spending time as an entrepreneur, it's almost as safe, for, if you use the playground analogy, it's giving people the opportunity to try out different roles, work with different people, work with different communication preferences, work at home, work in the office, whatever it is. You can usually find your way, but it does take a little bit of time and a bit of patience, obviously. So what do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? I can see why, certainly from my experience, starting as someone who ultimately built a career within a corporate environment, who then started becoming more of that sort of intrapreneur, but just being given the chance to find that was what I liked doing, what I enjoyed doing, and what I was pretty good at doing, right? I think there's benefits of that, and some of those benefits I think you mentioned, which is you're operating within a safe environment. You have a chance to fail without necessarily feeling the consequences of failing. If I'm employed by a company and I'm trying and failing, and my job is to try and fail, I will still get paid a salary. That's a great advantage. The fact that when you work in an organization and you're developing whether it's a new idea, a new department you're building, or a new business vertical, or a new product, if not fully, certainly you have the first steps of a go-to-market strategy laid out for you. You have a network around you, you have contacts, you have great advisors and consultants around you in different parts of the world you can bring in from within the organization. So I think there's lots of positives of doing that, intrapreneur to entrepreneur. In the same way, I think there's advantages of starting from the outside in. You're an entrepreneur first, have not worked for anyone ever. You learn the hustle, you learn that discipline, that at the end of the day, the buck stops with you. Something I realized when I moved from intra to entre, which is when I turn around, I don't have 100+ people there waiting to help me. But why? Because I told them they have to help. I don't have that anymore, right? I don't have a salary at the end of the month if I don't bring in the business. It's just black and white. There is no mama-san, hey, I need some money. Okay, so you're going to make money this month. As an entrepreneur, the worst that can happen, you fail 2 or 3 quarters in a row, you might get fired. Okay, I'll get another job. And you fail 2 or 3 quarters, unless you've got a decent amount of money in the bank as an entrepreneur, you're kind of out of luck. You're going to start working at the local coffee shop to pay the bills. It's just the reality, it's just the way it is. So I think it trains you for different things. I think there are 2 very different roles. If I were to step back, when I was in Melbourne last week, I had breakfast with my ex-CFO, who I was mentioning earlier. She's now a good friend and she's awesome. And we were talking about it. I was telling her, oh my God, I was getting some advice from her. She's like, oh my God, David, why didn't you do this 2 years before you became MD at BBH, and it could have made my life so much easier. Look at you talking about margins and finance and working capital and cash flows. And I'm like, wow, that's true, actually. It's stuff I never cared about. I never needed to care about. So again, I guess you need a bit of both. You need the hustle of the entrepreneur, right? And their appreciation for the fact that, you are running a business. You are a businessman first before anything else. But balance that with what intrapreneurs have, which ultimately is rigor. You get processes, you get best in class how things should be done. And then it's up to you to match, then there's a whole other problem. The problem I have is that sometimes, certainly a lot of mistakes I did in the first a year or so, which was defaulting back to my big company behaviors, which is something you naturally do. Oh, let's hire someone to do that, and someone to do that, and someone to do that. Then you realize, damn it, I just paid 3 wages that I could have done myself, and now I can't pay myself. Damn it. So you do get into those things. But yeah, look, I think both are very legitimate routes, and I think it really rounds you coming from one way or from the other.
There's commonality, isn't there? I mean, I feel there's definitely a massive theme around consistency. And like you're saying, pushing, albeit
accountability, I guess, is the word. Sorry. Yeah. I think accountability is the word that entrepreneurs really digs into your brain. You are accountable to yourself, to your team, to your clients, to everyone. It's you. It points your fingers in your face. That, I think, is good. It's a really good behavior.
There's also a notion, I think, within companies now who are hiring and managing entrepreneurs, that accountability is also expected. You're working in that company as if you own it. And an expectation around that is almost set. You're buying fully into the vision, the values, the things that you're trying to deliver. You might have some shares, you might not, but even so, the expectation is there. And you're going up against people in that realm that are very much passionate about the company that they're working for. And so it feels almost competitive in that sense. Did you experience that?
Yeah, it's a weird one, right? Because I don't know if it's age, if it's wisdom, or if just the times have changed. But certainly when I was in my sort of role, when I was working for a company, I genuinely felt that I was the company was me. And I absolutely believed, I drank the Kool-Aid, I bought into what the company was doing and saying, and I loved every minute of it. I was operating within a massive bubble within a bubble. I was operating within the company bubble and then within an industry bubble. And I only realized, like everything, you only realize you're in a bubble when you're outside of it. When you're inside of it, it never looks like a bubble. The blue sky. Truman at the Truman Show never knew he was in a warehouse until he stepped out of my, oh, fuck, it's a warehouse. I can still see the sky. I didn't know that. It's kind of that, right? So I think that there is that danger. I think that there is a slightly more, and I don't think it's a cynical answer. I think partly is due to, again, wisdom and age, but partly as well due to circumstances, which is, I think very much, and certainly in the advertising creative industry, we are in an employees or workers or talents market, right? It's a massive, especially in Singapore, it's a massive squeeze. Median salaries of people working in the creative industry in Singapore went up 52% between 2021 and 2022. 52% median salaries. That's reflective in part to the sort of supply and demand squeeze, right? It's very much an employees market. I think that certainly makes your point harder. If ultimately, as we say in Italy, I've got the knife from the handle, I'm just going to move around. I'm going to move around and get more and get more and get more.
Yeah.
Well, now, when I was running someone else's company, I hated that. I'm like, how dare you do that? You need to work. You need to believe in what we are doing. We're all together in this. Look at it from the outside in, and apologies for the French. You're more than welcome to cut this out, but what a load of shit. Sorry, but you are paying me a salary to do a job. If I do a job really well, I'm going to accrue a very small percentage of the incremental value I am creating. If I'm lucky, if you've got a proper bonus scheme in place, you're ultimately benefit. But why should I care that much? Of course you should care to do your job properly, but why should? It's not my company. And that for me, it's a really important perspective to have, right? Because what it does is, I think when organizations start realizing that, that's when we really start moving into this real sort of human-centric design of organizations, which agencies are absolutely terrible at, right? Especially knowledge-based businesses that rely on talent and people and realize that actually these guys don't have to be passionate about the company. We need to earn that kind of respect and admiration from our employees. We can't expect it. So what are we going to do for them? How are we going to design work differently for our employees? With Cara, for a long time, we talked about, especially at the beginning of the company, ultimately our customer is the talent, is our talent, is the talent we work with. It's our main source of value creation. This idea, this old world notion that agencies love to shout from the rooftops, look after the worker, and everything else will take care of itself, which I absolutely believed in for years. It's actually nonsense in many ways. It should be look after the people and everything else will take care of itself. The work is simply a consequence of people working better, of better people, people believing in something. So I do think, I guess this shift is a consequence of both wisdom and experience, but I genuinely think it's also a consequence of the world has changed. Context has changed, and companies are often not very good at keeping up with the change.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot more fluid than it ever was, obviously. And there was talk of a great resignation. I'm not sure people said that went away. I'm not sure if it has. The possibilities are now much greater, and people can move more confidently forward out into the big wide world, into entrepreneurial experiments. The gig economy is there.
Absolutely.
I want to talk a bit about your new model. We've alluded to it a little bit, but through the Carrot Collective, it feels radical, it feels fresh. You've got a decentralized working model and a working model that would enable people with independent skill sets. They could be leaders, they could be practitioners, collaborators, but they're able to work in a way that sits outside of a typical organizational structure. And maybe tell us a bit about how that works, and maybe we could talk a bit about what we've described as being either right or wrong about some of these other organizations, accountability, how that works in a new way of working.
In a nutshell, we are a decentralized agency. In other words, we're a creative agency that operates a distributed talent model. What it means is it has two key features, right? On one hand, our front door is the door of an agency. We look like an agency, we speak like an agency. Importantly, we take the accountability that agencies take. The client is a Carrot Collective client. If something goes wrong in a project, ultimately we are accountable for that. And therefore, because we have that accountability, that puts the onus on us to make sure that we are delivering constantly and constant improvement. The other feature is what happens behind the scenes, and that's where it's very different, and that's where it operates very, very differently. I do believe creative agencies are here to stay and will always have a role for a number of reasons, which we'll talk about. I do believe that the creative agency model as it is today is not fit for purpose, or rather it's not fit for purpose for all the use cases that the model will be required for. And so what we're doing is providing an alternative to that. And what that sort of plumbing, if you want, looks like is instead of having hundreds of people performing their account management roles or their production roles or their strategy roles or their creative roles, we access talent from around the world, right? So what does that mean from a macro point of view? It basically plays on two macro shifts that we observed. The first one is a big move from centralized organizations to networks and ecosystems. So we operate like a network and an ecosystem, albeit with a little bit of centralization. And the second big shift, which I think is the most fundamental one, is it's a mindset shift from ownership of resources, i.e. people, to access to resources, i.e. people. And I think this is what is most transformational for me. When I always talk to people, when I talk to people about Carrot, they ask, well, what really matters to make you successful? Well, actually, it's two things. It's our ability to identify and access the best talent in the world that's fit for purpose across multiple disciplines. And two, the ability to match that talent both to the projects and to each other to create a team. So that every project, in effect, looks like a micro agency that's bespoke for the specific project or problem at hand that's being developed. The beautiful thing of this is that because it's distributed, because it's decentralized, because it's ultimately a low overhead model, meaning the employees we have within Carrot are people who help manage the ecosystem versus people who help deliver the outputs. Because of that, the same bespoke model applies to a $10,000 project as it does to a $10 million project. The process is exactly the same, just the size and the complexity will change. But suddenly a $10,000 project can be profitable in the same way a $10 million project can be profitable, as opposed to maybe in the traditional sort of agency land, whereby many agencies offer and provide and build bespoke teams for clients and projects. But if it's anything less than 2, 3, 4, 5 million a year with a retainer lasting at least 2 or 3 years, it's untenable. For good reasons, right? I'm not criticizing what agencies are doing or agency leaders are doing, because within the context of the model they're operating, absolutely, this is the way to make money. It's the only way to try to make money. My point is that that model is not anymore fit for purpose for many use cases. It is for some, but not for many.
Thinking it through, I mean, obviously, it's creating another option and probably a safe option, a good option still for people to be able to do as they feel is most suiting to them. It's through self-choice. You're probably driving your own destiny. If you're part of the collective and you're a self-starter, you've got to be able to push through and find your own path, really. But is that something that you feel? I know it probably needs to happen, people taking more responsibility for their own personal development without a massive, without yearly targets and regular reviews and performances and appraisals, all the things that get lined up in a big corporate. How does that side of things work in a way where it's all up to you, really? You can join in, you might be in a project, you come in, you move on to the next project, but is that sort of things possible too?
Yeah, look, I think there's a few very important features, right? And I'll go through a few of them, and hopefully I won't miss any out, but if I do, then we'll put more. I'll try to start right from the beginning. First thing first is that no single individual business will be able to drive this change or fulfill the needs that this change results in on their own. And therefore, the mindset of running a distributed business cannot be that, which is a traditional sort of agency behavior, putting your hands around your people and going, become impenetrable, no collaboration, only let's keep it within. Absolutely not. You have to think about it from an industry or ecosystem perspective. We need to help raise the floor. We need more. Our biggest success will come from convincing more agencies to work more in this way. Why? Because ultimately, our biggest enemy, if you want, is full-time jobs. We want as many people as possible to not have to take on full-time jobs to provide themselves with a living. No single agency can do that. We need an ecosystem of companies with enough business coming through to satisfy the needs of that sort of talent pools and talent ecosystems. So it needs to be open. It has to be open. And that's a complete mindset shift for the industry. One of my favorite authors on the matter is, you probably know, Rishad Tabakwala, ex-Publicis Group, amazing thinker and guy. And he's got this incredible podcast, blog, newsletter called The Future Does Not Fit in the Containers of the Past, which is so true, right? To drive this change, you cannot use the metrics and the thinking and the behaviors that you're used to. You need to break that completely, because the moment you compare it to what was or what is, our model makes no sense. You need to completely rewire it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there is no playbook, by the way. I should have said that first. We are writing the playbook as we go along, meaning we make up a lot of it, test it, fail or succeed, iterate and move on. Constantly, right? So this has been a process over time. Your point around sort of talent, taking more accountability, being more self-disciplined as well. Yes, to some extent, but at the same time, this model is not for everybody. If I was starting out in the industry, I wouldn't want to work this way. I would want a structure around me that can train me and teach me and help me sit in a room with people who've done it before who I can learn from. This model doesn't do that. And we can't claim it does, and we should never claim it does. Or we'll get back to those sort of old problems. And therefore the ecosystem, but again, when you think about ecosystem, okay, what part of the ecosystem can help serve that? Well, certainly agencies, and certainly agencies will keep having a role to train young talent in, that will then lead 3 to 5 years in. But maybe other players will emerge providing that training. Maybe that's a role that headhunters need to develop into. I don't know. Maybe it's the way that we work with a lot of educational institutions around the world, design schools, in Europe in particular, in South America. And we have a lot of conversations with very senior staff and deans of the schools. And what the schools are doing is starting to implement a lot more of this training into their own curriculum. We regularly have students, master students from the European Institute of Design working on projects with the Carrot Collective, certain type of projects, structured 3 to 6 month projects that have become training grants, because they can't really come in on the fly. They don't have the basics to do that. But there needs to be that training no matter what. So again, there needs to be an evolution of that. The third thing I want to touch upon, which you touched upon briefly, which is the appraisals. The appraisals usually are something that agencies or companies provide to obviously evaluate you, and on the back of which you will usually get a pay rise or a promotion. More often than not, a promotion without a pay rise, which again is bizarre, but that's the way the world, But again, performance appraisals and feedback is very important. So if we think about performance appraisals as feedback, right? Feedback to make you better. That will suddenly redesign how we do these appraisals. Feedback that helps you understand how to improve yourself when dealing with others. And therefore, one thing we're in the process of implementing within Carrot is at the end of every project, we have a three-way appraisal system, in effect, where the project lead, the client, and the project team all evaluate each other. Now, why that's important? That's important because at scale, what that does, it becomes almost an infallible method to expunge bad actors and identify good actors. That comes from the world of technology. I mean, Airbnb's secret sauce is their trust that they build between guests and hosts. And they've done that through a review system. That's ultimately it. And that's what we're trying to implement ultimately at scale to also gain that quality. And one more thing I just want to touch upon in this, and I think it's very important to take it outside for a moment, is what the system also does. It helps rebalance the client versus agency relationship. And what I mean by that is that if in the agency, let's call it 2.0, 1.0 world of today, all the power sits with the client. Why? Because the agency is desperate for business. And those agencies today are desperate for business because they have so much overhead that they need to pay. So the pressure is on, but they need to make money to pay that stuff before they make any money at all. Okay, so the power is all in on the client side, if you want. Now suddenly that changes because suddenly, from a client point of view, the talent is choosing to work with your client. The talent is choosing to work on this project. Now, if you don't treat the talent like the talent should be treated, if the relationship isn't healthy, the best talent won't want to work with you. They just won't. You will start being evaluated negatively. People will be able to see that you're not great to work for because of these reasons, or they might have previous bad experience with you. And they will just say no. And as long as there is enough opportunities out there, that system over time will start correcting itself. And I think there's something quite magical about that, which at scale will create much greater harmony.
Oh, there's so many great points there. I think one of the ones that really jumps out is that last one, particularly around how to make it not only just a more level playing field between clients and the agencies and the consultants that they work with. Many agencies and consultancy leaders are often looking at it not from the point of view as being a vendor or taking on a project or a piece of work, but actually from the point of view of partnership. And the holy grail really is to feel like you're part of the client's organization and to deliver outcomes that are not measured by you and your agency or consultancy standard, but in a way that actually delivers tangible value to your client. And ultimately, that's really hard through one project or through a campaign, whatever it is you're working on. But at the same time, what you're describing is actually a starting point to make that a lot more possible. Aside from the fact that they're hiring people in, it's basically the team orchestration, the team arrangement that then comes together and you're all working together. It's in pursuit of the client's goal that you're working for, obviously. But it's, that team that's delivering it is driving it because they want to do it. And that's the big difference. The motivation,
Completely.
It aligns with them, their aspirations, their values, the direction they want to take. It can align to their development goals. I'm often amazed at how constrained it feels. Having been an entrepreneur and working within organizations myself, you're always trying to figure out what the next learning opportunity is. It becomes process driven. You're needing to compete with other people for training budget. And ultimately, if you were in control of your own work, you'd be able to go off to MIT or Stanford or Oxford or wherever you wanted to go to do your training at IDEO. You wouldn't have to wait 3 years or 4 years for it because you could just afford to pay for it yourself, right? So yeah, I think it's just about feeling comfortable with the fact that you could take more on yourself. And it turns like a really refreshing way of seeing the world of work, actually. Just to build on the points you've raised, I wonder if you could just maybe bring to life some of the outcomes or maybe talk through a project if you like, but something that just illustrates how this combination of subject matter experts from around the world has come together to deliver something that probably wouldn't have been possible through a traditional agency model in some way.
I think it's less about that wouldn't have been possible through an agency model. Because I think at the end of the day, look, an agency model can deliver anything really if you've got the scale. I think it comes down to the holy trinity, which is ultimately quality, cost, and time. So I think there's a number of projects we've worked on where the same thing would have been possible, but not at the same quality, at the same price, and within the same time frame. Maybe I'll use an example. I won't say what the brands are for obvious reasons, because in case I say anything I shouldn't. But I can give you the type of brands they are. The first one was in early days of Carrot Collective, actually. We were right in mid-pandemic. No one could travel. And there was a big movie launch happening in Australia. And the client had 6 weeks to develop something that would normally take them 4 months, right? Something that at huge scale, the biggest movie launch of the year. And we were able to put together a team that was managed from Singapore, which had a production team on the ground in Australia, in one state, that had another production team in another state in Australia because people couldn't travel between states, that had post-production in India, and that had design and motion graphics in South America and Brazil. And the reason we designed that team and were able to develop what we did was because the campaign had a few aspects. We were creating content. We were creating user-generated content from hundreds of children, drawings. We were having stunts involving LED screens hanging off helicopters flying over Sydney Harbour. It was just physically impossible to do that in that timeline with the restrictions to travel from one single location. So that was quite an interesting way. It was, again, we can talk about that for hours. It's an enormously complex project, almost 7-figure project with close to 20 people across 5 or 6 different markets around the world. More recently, again, and that's again very large. More recently, a very small project, 5 figures, low to make 5 figures. And it was a project for the Philippines. We were branding an esports team, a new professional esports team. We needed someone who understood Filipino culture from a strategy point of view, who understood the gaming culture. We needed a designer who understood the retail market, so merch, etc., as well as could understand branding and design from a sort of brand perspective. And we needed to do all of that in 2.5 weeks. Now, could an agency have done it? Yeah, probably. A small local agency in the Philippines might have been able to do it if they were able to find even the people with those skill sets and deep skill sets. So what we did in a matter of 48 hours, we were able to put a team that involved a Filipino-American with entertainment experience based out of LA, with a small network of gamers in Manila, and an ex-Adidas and Nike designer based in Brazil. And in 2.5 weeks, we had this world-class output delivered, and we made money on it. It's a profitable project, and I think that's important. So we're talking a project which was 1/30th of the other, both managed the same system, the same accountabilities, and so on and so forth. If you want a bad story, recently, similar branding project with a website builder, and the team just didn't deliver. We had to change the team 2/3 of the way through, and ultimately we had to do that at our own cost, because the developer didn't want to refund us. The responsibility is ours towards the client, and therefore it was our responsibility as the agency to take the hit for something ultimately we were fronting. So again, it works both ways. It's good and it's bad sometimes, but I think it's really about this 2 layers, right? The front end and the back end, the accountability of the front end agency with the flexibility and the benefits of the decentralized back end model.
But like you say, you're pushing forward, you're experimenting, you're learning from each one and evolving the practice and not feeling constrained by the agency model that you would sit within usually, right?
Completely. Look, and at the end of the day, that's exactly it, Krish, right? It's a mindset more than anything. I think mindset is half the problem most of the times, right? If you're willing to let go of some of the past and things that are holding you down, you realize how many more opportunities there actually are, out there. It's this idea of a sandbox, right? If I know the parameters within which I need to operate, I can experiment freely, but those parameters need to be constant. And that's what entrepreneurs are able to do. We know what our limitations are. We know what parameters we need to work within. Within those parameters, we can go as crazy as we want. We know we need to be accountable. We know we need to pursue. Great. But how we do it, we can change every day until we find the perfect market fit that we need.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I mean, just thinking more broadly and for the future of work and how people within so many roles out there are thinking, is this right? Is there another way? Can I find something else that will be as fulfilling? is the grass greener somewhere else? There are always questions, more questions than answers usually. And from your point of view, and maybe just a reflection around where you feel the world of work in that respect is heading, and how people can or should navigate some of the choices that they might need to make.
Yeah, so look, again, I'll speak through the lens of the creative business and the creative agency model, because I'm not a future of work expert. I just spent a lot of time thinking about it because it's something which is very relevant to me and something I'm very interested in. What certainly we are working towards is, well, first of all, actually, let me start with my prediction on this, which is I 100% believe, and I'm staking my own sort of reputation on this, and I've said this publicly and also keep saying it publicly, is that within the next 5 years, 80% of creative agencies will be delivering at least 80% of their output through a distributed model. It's the only way. And the reason why 80% is because all of their project-based work will need to be delivered through a distributed model, with potentially one or two retainers, which require a different type of setup that will require full-time staff. But I'm absolutely convinced that is the future, number one. Number two, I don't think there will be a model. I think that's part of the problem the industry has had. Well, this is the model. The model is not working. Why is there a model? Oh, David, is your model the future? I'm like, no, it's a model that's fit for purpose with regard to certain use cases. It's not right for everyone. We don't do retainers, for example. Economically, it absolutely makes no sense. Why would I not hire people full-time if I was delivering the same outputs every time? If I was a specialist agency only doing one thing, of course I'm going to hire full-time people. It makes sense, right? And we need to start from the economic model. That's really important. But my ideal future of work, and ultimately where we are moving with Carrot over time, we might never quite get there, but that's certainly the ambition is. I'm a big fan of Web3 philosophy. I'm a big fan of especially decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs. I do think the DAO system, the DAO setup is absolutely perfect for the creative industry. And really why? Because ultimately, I think the future of the creative industry will be thousands, hundreds of thousands of solopreneurs and micro businesses living in this sort of ecosystem that will come together around projects, that will separate and will come together on other projects in different formations, and where they will ultimately be rewarded for their contribution, for their participation. And those rewards will be distributed algorithmically through digital money and through smart contracts. It's possible. It can be done tomorrow. It can be done today. Is the market ready for it, especially the supply side of the market, the brands that are paying the bills? No, because accountability is a big issue when you're trying to apply decentralized models to the service industry. But solutions are slowly being developed. People often think decentralized organizations are about small little experiments. Ethereum doesn't have an office, a headquarter, or a CEO or a management team. Yeah. It's completely decentralized and managed by a community, and it's worth $500 billion. It is absolutely possible. And it deals with money, which is the thing people are most scared about. So is it possible? Yes. Are we still trying to think about it too much in terms of how things are today? Yes, for natural reasons and obvious reasons. But that's certainly, I believe, the trend to where things are moving. As I said, will we ever get there in our lifetimes or ever? I don't know. But I think trajectory is important.
And you'll have some fun in the meantime, right? There'll still be lots of fireworks.
Absolutely. That's what matters ultimately, is keep learning, keep having fun, doing it with people who you enjoy working with. That's the biggest, I believe, benefit of this model.
Yeah, not something you can always choose if you work in a company, I might add.
Hey, exactly. You choose who you work with and who you work and what you work on. What better than that?
Yeah, that's the dream. All right, well, I think we might wrap there, actually, David. So thank you again so much for your time. Loved your perspective on the new model, what you're doing at Carrot. It's amazing work. And yeah, I usually finish by asking our guests whether there's a way in which people can get in touch with you, if you'd be happy for people to connect in some way. Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, LinkedIn is the obvious. David Webster with a strange picture where I do something. I look like a Greek philosopher. That's a picture from many years ago. That's always easy. Or just drop me an email, david@thecarrotcollective.com. So anytime, always happy for a chat. And if you're in Singapore, for a coffee as well. Perfect. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, David. Awesome. I'll leave you to the rest of your day. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye. Okay, so that's it for this episode. If you're hearing this message, you've listened all the way to the end. So thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review and share this episode with your friends, team members, leaders, if you think it'll make a difference. After all, we're trying to help you, the entrepreneurs, kick more goals within your organizations. If you have any questions about the things we covered in the show, please email me directly at chris@companyroad.co. I answer all messages, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And to hear about the latest episodes and updates, please head to companyroad.co to subscribe. Tune in next Wednesday for another new episode.